Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome back to yet another episode or video note from Notes from the Pastor Cave. And if you're in the eastern two-thirds of the U.S., you know that we've been through kind of a heat wave. Not kind of a heat wave, but definitely a heat wave. But around here, where I am in the middle states of the East Coast. It has, we had rain, pretty significant rain, and then for about a day, and then it all kind of cleared out, and very, very beautiful weather ensued. We were in the 70s yesterday. We're back up into the 80s today, but the humidity's much lower, and it's just a beautiful day. So I'm here on the veranda, and I've got the iced coffee going. The official, not the official drink of Rhode Island, actually. Coffee milk is the official drink of Rhode Island. But it was Rhode Island that invented iced coffee and has now spread it across the globe. So, to bring it full circle, if the last several weeks had been in using my New England voice, I would say it was wicked hot out. But anyways, here we are, and today I want to begin really such a significant chapter in the book of Genesis, and such a significant chapter in the entire scriptures, which in my Bible is simply referred to as the fall. It is Genesis chapter 3. And it begins with this conversation between the serpent and Eve. When you look at it closely, Adam is really much more involved than has originally been portrayed in the beginning stages of it. But I want to focus in on something, because this has been covered so much over the years. I want to focus in on something that maybe you never noticed before if you'd studied this. First, the first thing we have to understand is that if that there's this serpent that is involved is not it's not a conventional snake that just happens to be having a conversation. Okay. This is Satan himself, the fallen angel above all fallen angels, who is speaking through this animal, through this critter, and he says to the woman, "Did God actually say you shall not eat of any tree in the garden?" Okay, so the first thing he wants to do, and this is a little bit different angle that I want to take today, and it's important to realize that if this is the perfect will of God, and if this is exactly what God wants you to do here, okay, and we're looking at a little scale here. There are actually two ways that we can go. Okay, so God has laid down these rules, which really is rule. Okay, so He says, "This is what I want you to do in the garden. I want you to take it. I want you to tend it. I'm giving you work and purpose," and we talked about that already. But he makes one rule that is a proscriptive rule, which is, hey, you have access to absolutely everything in this garden except this one thing, and it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, so we've all basically every tree you can think of, and God has made this wonderful place, and God says, "Look, I just have this one thing that I don't want you to do here, and that is, I don't want you to eat of this one tree. God doesn't say you can't look at it. God doesn't say you can't touch it. God didn't say that whatever. Okay, He just says, don't eat of the fruit. Okay, so here comes Satan, and I really want you to notice here what Satan does. And again, this is going to be a little bit different than some of the other things you've heard before. This is what Satan does. Okay, he tries to create a legalism that doesn't exist. All right. So as I said, there's two directions you can whatever God's laws are, whatever God says are the rules of life. Okay. There's two directions you can go. You can go in the direction of we're gonna ignore that. We're just gonna I don't care or whatever, or I'm not gonna try, and I'm just not gonna listen. Okay. But if this is doing God's will perfectly or following God's laws perfectly, okay, we have a tendency to focus on this idea that of going this way, okay, away from that, all right. But there's another direction that you can go to. That other direction is towards legalism, or towards adding more rules than the ones that are given. And I want you to notice that as my hand moves away, that's also away from what God wants and what God is asking. Okay? So both directions move away from what God wants. And when we do that, we are in danger of not following what it is that God wants us to follow. Okay, so it's not just about ignoring the rules, but it's about putting too many rules on. Okay, so Satan says, okay, he doesn't come along and say, oh, just ignore what God says. Don't just go ahead and do what you want to do. All right, he doesn't do that. Okay, he says, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? Well, no, he did. God didn't say that at all. He said there's one tree, okay? So he tries to create kind of a ridiculous legalism that says, God said you can't do anything here in the garden. You can't look at any of the tree, okay? And it happens again. And the woman answers. She says, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden." Okay, so she's got that right. But God said, "You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden." Okay, she's got it. She nailed it down. But now she's the one that adds on the legalism. Neither shall you touch it, lest you die. Okay? God never said anything about touching it at all. Okay? So again, what she has done is she has added an extra rule on there that just as much moves her away from what God wants than if she ignored God completely. Okay? By the way, the camera does everything backwards, so I'm really struggling with this. This is exactly the world that Jesus finds himself in when he comes to earth. Okay, we had the Israelites, they're Judah really. The Israelites were already broken up and sent into exile. But Judah was sent into exile by God because they were just basically had gotten to the point where they were ignoring God's rules. All right, and so what happened when they went into exile is that the religious authorities, the rabbis, the priests, they got together and they said, look, we can't allow this to ever happen again. We need to become a holy people, okay? We need to rededicate ourselves to God. And the way we're going to do that is we're gonna be really super conscious of God's rules, the Ten Commandments, and the other rules around everything that God has said in the original scriptures. Okay, but to make sure that we don't break the rules, we're going to add more rules. Okay, so that's what they do. They pile. They spend the next several hundred years creating rules upon rules upon rules that were never commanded by God, because their thinking was, if we, if the rules are here, then we'll make sure that we don't get below that. So we'll stack more rules up, and just to really super make sure you don't break the rules. Okay, so a religious person in the time of Jesus, when Jesus comes to earth and begins ministering to the Israelites, is burdened down by all these just crazy rules. You can only take a certain number of steps on the Sabbath day, because anything beyond that is considered work, and you can't lift this up, and you can't touch this over here. And remember, they got all over every time Jesus healed on the Sabbath day. They jumped all over him. Okay, like like here's a guy that's been lame for 40 years or whatever. It's like, well, it's going to have to be 40 years in one day, because we can't have you healing on the Sabbath. Okay, it's just this ridiculous foolishness that comes, and we have to understand in our lives. Most of us understand very well that if we walk away from what it is that God wants us to do, and we ignore what it is that God wants us to do, that's going to move us away from the center of God's will. Okay, but what a lot of us fail to pay attention to is that if we add extra rules onto what God wants to do, that we're actually doing the same thing. We're moving away from the center of what it is that God wants for our lives. Okay, and I'm not going to go into all the specifics of churches over the years, and the extra rules about clothing that they've added, and honestly, a lot of these things are thrown onto women lots of times. These extra burdens, and and what happens is that when you create a legalistic church, it looks good at the beginning. It looks like, wow, these people are really following what God wants, because they're trying so hard to keep all these rules. But really what they're doing is they're really moving away from what it is that God wants. And you can't be surprised. Those churches always die. They always die out. Legalistic churches, they always end up with 20 gray heads, and they don't grow, because they can't reach the culture that they are in. So always keep that in mind. That it's very obvious when that we don't want to move away from what God is doing by ignoring what He wants to do. Or deciding in the case of sin and disobedience, we all kind of understand that, but we can also move away from what God is doing by moving towards legalism. Okay, it's the same thing. As I like to say, it's the same thing, only different. Okay, so Vita brevis gloria aeterna. Life is short, glory is eternal. We will see you next time around. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Don't forget to push that little bell so that you get notifications. All right? Have a great day, and God bless.